Artemis II will go through something no human has ever been through before. For more than 53 years, no person left low Earth orbit, not even once. That was the longest gap in space travel since we first learned how to explore. And it ended 4 days ago when a rocket carrying 4 astronauts shot through the Florida sky and headed toward the moon. Artemis II is not a copy of Apollo. It is not a repeat. The crew flying right now, Reid Wiseman, Victor Glover, Christina Koch and Jeremy Hansen, are doing things inside that spacecraft that the Apollo astronauts could never have imagined. And some of what they are going through would have sounded like a fantasy story to the engineers of 1972. So what changed in 50 years? Almost everything. Start with the spacecraft itself. The Apollo command module gave its 3-person crew about 210 cubic feet of living space. That is roughly the inside of a large closet. 3 grown men sealed inside a closet for up to 14 days. Orion gives its 4-person crew 330 cubic feet, nearly 60% more room. That's about the space of 2 minivans parked side by side with the seats taken out. Still tight, still cramped by any normal measure. But the difference between a closet and 2 minivans matters a lot when you are 250,000 miles from the nearest hospital and you have not been able to stretch your legs in a week. The extra space is not just about being comfortable, it changes what the crew can actually do. Orion has a private bathroom area with real doors that close. There is a toilet called the Universal Waste Management System, very similar to the one on the International Space Station. It collects waste separately and does so with something the Apollo astronauts never had: privacy. The Apollo crews used plastic bags that they taped to their bodies, used in front of each other, and then sealed and stored inside the cabin with them for the rest of the trip. Almost every Apollo astronaut who has spoken openly about it says it was one of the worst parts of space travel. The Artemis II crew will never have to go through that, and honestly, that alone might be worth the 53 years of waiting. Then there is exercise. Apollo astronauts did not work out in space. There was no room, no gear, and on trips lasting less than 2 weeks, NASA decided the muscle and bone loss was okay. The Artemis II crew exercises every day except on launch and landing days, hire 30 minutes each, using a device called a flywheel. It weighs about 30 pounds and fits in a space roughly the size of a carry-on bag. It works like a yo-yo, using a cable system that pushes back with up to 400 pounds of force, depending on how hard you pull. You can row with it, you can do squats, you can do deadlifts. To give you an idea, the exercise equipment on the International Space Station weighs over 4,000 pounds and takes up 850 cubic feet. The flywheel does much of the same work in a tiny fraction of the size. Apollo had nothing like it. The crews came home weak. Some could barely stand. The Artemis II crew will come home having done deadlifts in zero gravity on the way to the moon, which is something that would have sounded completely crazy to anyone alive during Apollo. The rocket that got them there is a different beast too. Apollo used the Saturn V, the most powerful rocket ever flown at that time, producing 7.5 million pounds of thrust at liftoff. The space launch system that carried Artemis II off the pad on April 1st produces 8.8 million pounds, 17% more. Both rockets are used only once, which feels almost old-fashioned in an age when SpaceX lands its boosters back on ships. But the SLS was not built to save money. It was built to send Orion and its crew toward the moon in one single launch. No building in orbit, no refueling, no docking needed to leave Earth. The Saturn V did the same thing. The difference is what sits on top. Apollo ran entirely on fuel cells and batteries. Hydrogen and oxygen combined to make electricity, and as a useful side effect, drinking water. It was a smart system, but a limited one. Every bit of power the crew used came from a tank that was getting emptier. Orion unfolds 4 large solar panel wings after reaching space. Each one is covered in cells that turn sunlight into electricity. The power supply is for all practical purposes endless as long as the sun is shining. This quietly changes how the mission feels. Apollo crews were always watching their supplies, always aware of how much oxygen, power and water they had left. Orion's crew still tracks their supplies, since oxygen and water do not come from solar panels, but the power situation is completely different. The spacecraft systems can run longer and stronger with more backup options because the power source keeps renewing itself. And the service module, the part of the spacecraft that handles movement, temperature control and life support, was not even built in the United States. It was built by Airbus in Europe and provided by the European Space Agency. Apollo was an all-American project from top to bottom. Artemis is built on teamwork between countries by design. A Canadian astronaut is on this flight because of a deal signed in 2020. European hardware is keeping the crew alive. The next part of the program includes the Lunar Gateway, a space station in orbit around the Moon with parts contributed by many countries. The era of one country going to the Moon alone ended when Apollo ended. What took its place is messier, slower and more complex. But it also means the cost, the knowledge and the risk are shared. Now look at what is inside the walls. Orion's flight computers are roughly 20,000 times faster than Apollo's. 20,000! Apollo's main computer had about 72 kilobytes of memory and could run around 40,000 steps per second. A basic smartphone today blows it away. Orion runs 4 separate computers at the same time. Each one is about 25 times faster than the computers on the space station, and 400 times faster than those on the space shuttle. The cockpit is fully digital, with screens, software and live route changes. Apollo's cockpit had physical switches, dials and gauges. The astronauts had to read everything by hand and do corrections with a lot of help from the ground. Orion can in theory fly itself. It proved that on Artemis I in 2022, when the crewless spacecraft completed a full trip around the Moon and came back to Earth on its own. That matters more than it sounds. The Apollo astronauts were in many ways passengers on a ship that needed constant ground support to work. Mission Control in Houston made most of the big calls. Orion shifts that balance. The Artemis II crew has been doing manual flying tests in deep space, steering the spacecraft themselves and seeing how it responds, trying different control settings, and checking how the vehicle handles when a person is actively flying it. Apollo astronauts flew manually during certain moments like docking and landing, but they never flew the command module through open space the way Wiseman and Hansen just did. This is a spacecraft being built for a future where astronauts may need to work on their own far from Earth, only in situations where a communication delay of even a few seconds to the Moon, or up to 20 minutes to Mars, makes ground control useless in an emergency. Speaking of communication, Apollo talked to Houston using radio waves, the same basic idea as an AM radio station, just pointed at the Moon. It worked, but the audio was rough, the signal was narrow, and sending a single photo could take minutes. Orion still has that radio as a backup, but its main system for fast data is something completely new: laser communication. The Orion Artemis II optical system uses infrared light to send data back to Earth, at speeds that would have seemed impossible during Apollo. By the 4th day of the mission, the system had already sent down 100 gigabytes of data, including sharp, clear photos the crew was taking through Orion's windows. Apollo's total data sent back from an entire mission was measured in megabytes. The Artemis II crew is sending high-quality images from deep space in something close to real time. When Christina Koch looked back at Earth through Orion's window, and that image appeared on screens around the world within hours, that was laser communication doing something radio never could. The views are different too. Every Apollo mission that reached the Moon flew about 70 miles above the surface, close enough to see individual craters and watch the line between day and night move across the ground. Artemis II will not get that close. At its nearest point during the flyby, Orion will be about 4,660 miles from the Moon's surface. That's a very different visual experience. Instead of flying low over the surface and seeing a small strip of it at a time, the Artemis II crew will see the entire Moon at once, the whole thing from pole to pole filling their windows. No Apollo astronaut ever had that view at their closest point, and because of the shape of this particular flight path and the timing of the launch, the crew will see something no human being has ever seen with their own eyes: the Orientale basin. It sits on the line between the near side and the far side of the Moon, a massive impact crater about 600 miles across. Robot spacecraft have taken photos of it. Instruments in orbit have mapped it, but no person has ever looked at it directly. The Apollo missions were planned so that the near side was lit up during their flybys, which meant the Oriental region was always in shadow or just out of view. Artemis II's flight path changes that. NASA has confirmed that the crew has already taken photos of it through Orion's windows. For the first time, a human being looked at a part of the Moon that only machines had ever seen before. There is also a solar eclipse coming, not the kind you see from Earth, where the Moon blocks the sun. This one happens when the Earth blocks the Sun, as seen from the spacecraft behind the Moon. It will last about 53 minutes, happening roughly an hour after Earth comes into view. No Apollo crew saw anything like it. The angle never lined up that way. Artemis II's flight path was not planned to create this eclipse, but the physics of the flyby made it happen anyway, and the crew and science teams on the ground are treating it as a bonus chance to observe. Picture watching your home planet, a thin blue curve, as slowly slide in front of the Sun while you float behind the Moon in the deepest quiet any human has ever known. Reid Wiseman described the view so far as something no amount of training could have prepared him for. He said you could see the entire Earth from pole to pole, Africa, Europe, and if you looked closely, the Northern Lights. That was from part of the way through the journey. The flyby views will be something else entirely. The mission will also break the record for the farthest distance any human has ever travelled from Earth. That record currently belongs to the Apollo 13 crew, not by choice. Their path home after an oxygen tank exploded carried them 248,655 miles from Earth. Artemis II is expected to reach about 252,757 miles. The difference is around 4,100 miles. That may not sound like much compared to 250,000, but the meaning behind it matters. Apollo 13 set that record because something went terribly wrong, and the crew had to swing around the Moon with a broken spacecraft to get home. Artemis II will break it because the mission was built that way from the start. The free return path, which uses the Moon's gravity to bring the spacecraft home without needing a big engine burn, was Apollo 13's emergency backup plan. It is Artemis II's main flight plan. What was once a last resort is now the standard way of doing things, and at the end of it all, the Artemis II crew will face something no human has ever survived at this speed: re-entry. When Orion hits Earth's atmosphere on the way home, it will be moving at about 25,000 miles per hour. That is faster than any crewed spacecraft has ever travelled during re-entry. Faster than Apollo, even faster than the shuttle, faster than anything. The heat shield will face temperatures close to 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit as hot plasma wraps around the vehicle and cuts off all contact. The crew will be completely alone during those minutes, unable to talk to Houston, unable to do anything except trust the engineering. That heat shield, by the way, carries its own story into this mission. After Artemis I returned in 2022, engineers found unexpected damage in the protective material. Parts of the heat shield burned and broke away in ways the models had not predicted. The main structure held and the temperatures inside stayed within safe limits, but the damage was serious enough that NASA brought in an outside review team and spent years studying whether the shield was safe for a crewed flight. Some engineers had concerns. Some wanted a new shield before putting people on top of it. NASA head Jared Isaacman looked at the data, met with engineers and outside experts, and gave the green light. The shield flying on Artemis II is basically the same design, with the understanding that changes are planned for Artemis III. The crew knows this. They accepted the risk. Every astronaut who has ever flown has accepted some version of this deal, the understanding that the engineering is not perfect, that the margins are real but not endless, and that exploring new places means being willing to go anyway. The crew itself shows something Apollo never did. Victor Glover is the first person of colour to travel beyond low Earth orbit. Christina Koch is the first woman. Jeremy Hansen is the first non-American citizen. Hansen is Canadian. Chosen through a 2020 agreement between the United States and Canada that made Canadian involvement in Artemis official. Apollo was all American, all white, and all male. Not because NASA directly turned anyone away, but because the system that produced military test pilots in the 1960s was itself unfair and closed off. Artemis II does not fix that history. Nothing can. But it does mean that the first humans to see the Moon, up close, in over 50 years, look more like the people they represent. There is also a quieter experiment happening inside the cabin that Apollo never tried. The crew is being watched for the effects of deep space radiation on the body, in ways that go far beyond what any Apollo mission tracked. Radiation monitors, sleep tracking, heart data, all of it is being recorded to understand what 10 days outside Earth's protective magnetic field does to the human body. In low Earth orbit, that magnetic field blocks most of the dangerous particles from deep space, trapping them in bands called the Van Allen belts. The International Space Station orbits safely below those belts. Every crewed mission since Apollo 17 has stayed below them. The Artemis II crew passed through both belts on the way out, and will pass through them again on the way home, open to the very radiation those bands hold. Apollo astronauts went through the same thing, but the health tracking was basic compared to what we have now. Some Apollo crews reported seeing flashes of light with their eyes closed, caused by cosmic rays hitting their eyes. We understand more about what causes those flashes now. We know the risks are real and build up over time. The data from this mission will shape every deep space crew choice and trip length limit for many years to come. 4 people are in deep space right now. That is the most humans in deep space at the same time in the history of our kind. Apollo never sent more than 3 beyond low Earth orbit on one mission. Artemis II has 4. They are eating rehydrated meals from a food warmer about the size of a briefcase. They are sleeping in bags attached to the walls of a cabin not much bigger than a walk-in closet. They are working out on a 30-pound yo-yo device. They have already seen parts of the moon that no one alive has ever seen. And by tomorrow, they will have travelled farther from Earth than any human being who came before them. And they are doing all of this in a spacecraft that is, if we are being honest, still a capsule. Bigger than Apollo, smarter than Apollo, better equipped, better connected, better in almost every way you can measure, but still a capsule. Still a metal shell with a heat shield on the bottom and a parachute system on the top, built to keep 4 people alive in the most harsh place humans have ever entered. The basic engineering challenge has not changed since 1968. You need air, water, food, heat control, radiation protection, a way to slow down, and a way to survive the landing. 53 years of progress have made every one of those systems lighter, faster, more reliable, and more capable. They have not made any of them easy. The Artemis II crew will land in the Pacific Ocean sometime around April 11th. Recovery ships will be waiting. Airbags will blow up around the capsule to turn it right side up if it lands on its side or upside down. Another thing Apollo did not have. Divers will swim to the bobbing spacecraft, open the hatch, and help 4 people climb out into the sunlight. Those 4 people will have finished the first crewed mission beyond Earth's orbit in more than half a century. They will have tested every system that future crews will count on to actually land on the moon. They will have seen things that change how they understand their own planet, their own smallness, their own luck at being alive on the one rock in the solar system where you can breathe outside. When the Apollo astronauts came home, they came home as winners. The moon had been the target and they hit it. When the Artemis II crew comes home, they will come home as pioneers. The moon is not the final stop anymore. It is the first one. Everything this crew is testing, the life support, the navigation, the heat shield, the communications, the exercise gear, the toilet, all of it is being checked. Not just for moon missions, but for the journey that comes after. Mars. Orion has already been looked at for a 1,000-day mission when paired with extra living modules. The data the Artemis II crew is collecting right now, including how their bodies handle deep space radiation, how they sleep, how their hearts adjust, will directly shape the spacecraft and mission plans that send the first humans to another planet. Apollo proved we could leave. Artemis is figuring out how to stay gone. Right now, as you hear this, 4 human beings are closer to the moon than anyone has been since December of 1972. They are looking out windows that are bigger and clearer than anything Apollo had. They are sending images home at speeds that make Apollo's radio look like smoke signals. They are flying a spacecraft that can think for itself, built with 3D printed parts and powered by the sun, carrying the lessons of 53 years of trying, failing, learning, and waiting. They are not repeating what Apollo did. They are picking up a thread that was dropped in 1972, pulling it forward and building something new. And tomorrow they fly behind the moon for 40 minutes. No signal will reach them. No voice from Earth, no data link, no connection to anything human except the 3 other people floating beside them in a capsule 250,000 miles from home. The Apollo astronauts knew that silence too. It is the one thing that has not changed. The moon still blocks the signal. The emptiness is still the emptiness. And for those 40 minutes, the Artemis II crew will understand something that no amount of technology can soften. The old, simple truth of being alone in the dark, farther from home than any road or wire or beam of light can follow. That silence is the same. Everything else is new. Thanks for watching. Please consider subscribing, and I'll see you in the next one.